the U.S. military operating in a highly volatile, really close quarters environment, like Iraq, for example.
Extremely high stress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you are talking about an organization that possesses the most overwhelming, technologically sophisticated firepower on the planet.
Yeah, without a doubt.
But behind closed doors, commanders were issuing these directives and intentionally seeking out training for their troops on how not to use those weapons.
Which is wild to think about.
Right. They were looking for a way to engage in physical conflict without striking, without shooting, and, well, without destroying the person in front of them.
It sounds completely counterintuitive to everything we assume about military combat, right?
Oh, totally.
We condition ourselves to view conflict, especially martial conflict, through this lens of maximum impact. Like, you neutralize a threat by hitting it harder than it can hit you.
Yeah, the old overwhelming force idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yet the source materials we are examining today, they reveal this really profound shift away from that destructive model. It focuses entirely on leverage, yielding, and preservation.
And that shift is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We have a really fascinating stack of sources in front of us today.
They really do.
We were looking at a transcript of a news report by NBC6's Tom Lamas, and he's covering this very specific U.S. Army training session down in Miami. And we are pairing that with a highly detailed blog post, plus a vast collection of community reviews from a facility called the Self-Defense Academy, COS, out in Colorado Springs.
So we're kind of spanning the whole spectrum here.
We are. Our mission today is to explore how the core principles of a specific martial art are completely transforming high-stakes professions.
Yeah.
Like the military and law enforcement.
Right.
And then seeing how that trickles all the way down into everyday community building.
Yeah, and to set the table for you listening, the connective tissue between these sources is the application of Jujitsu, or Jujutsu principles.
Right. Okay, let's get into that terminology a bit.
Sure. So our sources use a few terms interchangeably. You'll hear Jujitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the Valente Gracie method. But the overarching concept to keep in mind here is that Jujitsu translates roughly to the soft art, or the yielding art.
Which sounds like an oxymoron when you're talking about the Army.
It really does. But it's a methodology built entirely on manipulating an opponent's skeletal structure and their center of gravity rather than relying on blunt force trauma.
I want to say right up front to everyone listening, even if you aren't a soldier and you aren't a police officer, this analysis is going to seriously challenge your everyday assumptions about conflict resolution.
Oh, absolutely.
Because this is fundamentally about how the human brain and body manage high-stress situations gracefully.
Yeah, grace under pressure.
Exactly. So let's start at the extreme end of the spectrum with a military application, because this NBC6 report really sets the stage.
It's a great starting point.
So the Department of Defense was sending out orders for more self-defense training for troops who were rotating in and out of Iraq.
Right.
And we have these U.S. soldiers based in Hollywood, Florida, rolling down into North Miami Beach to get a crash course at the Valente Gracie Jiu-Jitsu school.
And context is really crucial here, I think. The U.S. Army had originally incorporated aspects of Jiu-Jitsu into their broader combative program about 12 years prior to this report.
Okay, so it wasn't totally brand new.
Right, not totally new, but the tactical realities on the ground were shifting. The Department of Defense realized there was a major gap in the soldiers' close quarters toolkit. They needed troops to urgently brush up on these specific non-lethal skills before deploying.
I do have to push back on the logistics described in this report, though.
How so?
Well, it says over the course of just 3 hours, these soldiers were learning sucker punch defenses, basic takedowns, and how to physically mount and control an opponent.
Yeah, 3 hours is fast.
Right. How on earth does a 3-hour crash course in Miami meaningfully prepare a soldier for a super unpredictable insurgency in the Middle East? It feels like trying to teach someone a foreign language on the flight over.
It is a compressed timeline, undeniably. You can't argue with that.
Yeah.
But the objective of that 3-hour session wasn't to produce black belts.
Okay, fair enough.
The objective was to fundamentally rewire the soldier's initial physical response to a threat. The news report lays out the tactical reality pretty clearly. U.S. troops in Iraq were frequently walking side by side with civilians.
Just blending in.
Blending in with potential insurgents, too. So, in a crowded marketplace, if someone lunges at a soldier or grabs their gear, a machine gun is a catastrophic tool for restraint.
Oh, the collateral damage would just be unthinkable.
Exactly. And the source specifically mentions the overarching military directive was to win the hearts and minds of Iraqis.
Right, and you cannot win trust if your only response to a close-quarter shove or like a grab is lethal force.
You just can't. What that 3-hour training provided was a mechanical alternative.
A mechanical alternative. I like that.
Yeah, the source material emphasizes that this specific style of training is based entirely on leverage and technique, rather than strikes and kicks.
So it's not about punching your way out.
No, not at all. If a soldier understands the basic mechanics of how to manipulate an attacker's wrist, or, how to shift their own hips to throw an attacker off balance,
then they suddenly have a reliable, non-lethal option to subdue a threat.
Exactly.
It's kind of like the difference between trying to break down a locked door with a sledgehammer versus just knowing how to pick the lock.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. Like, one requires maximum destructive force and leaves a massive mess. The other just requires an understanding of the internal mechanics, leverage over strikes. You are basically just picking the lock of the human skeletal system.
That is an incredibly apt way to visualize it. And as a quick reminder to you listening, when we analyze these military directives, or as we'll get into shortly, police use of force,
We are strictly looking at the data, the mechanics, and the claims presented in our sources.
Yes, exactly. We're taking no political stance here. We are impartially mapping out the logic detailed in these texts.
Right, we're just reading what the sources say. And the logic of that military training actually provides a flawless transition to the domestic front.
It really does.
Because if a non-lethal leverage-based method works in the intense, hyper-unpredictable environment of a foreign combat zone, it completely changes how we should look at domestic law enforcement.
Absolutely. Especially since police-community relations are constantly evolving and, highly scrutinized.
And they rely so heavily on the concept of proportional force.
Which brings us to the blog post from the Self-Defense Academy, COS, out in Colorado Springs.
Yes, the Colorado Springs source.
They delve really deeply into the methodology of the Valente brothers, which, remember, are the same instructors behind that Miami military training.
Right, the through line.
And their entire philosophy hinges on one defining phrase: control without injury.
Control without injury. So the goal stops being about defeating or punishing an opponent, and it shifts entirely to just neutralizing the threat safely.
Exactly. And the blog provides a really compelling case study to back up how this actually works on the streets.
The Marietta one, right?
Yes. They look at the police department in Marietta, Georgia. They launched this mandatory program teaching their officers jujitsu specifically to handle physical confrontations.
And the outcomes they tracked were pretty staggering.
They really were.
By mandating this training, they saw a significant reduction in the overall use of force. They documented fewer injuries to the suspects being apprehended and simultaneously fewer injuries to the officers themselves.
Which is a huge win-win.
Totally. And furthermore, officers who completed this training were remarkably less likely to resort to using their firearms, tasers, or aggressive striking restraints.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that for a second, because on the surface, it sounds like a paradox.
It really does. By taking police officers and explicitly teaching them how to physically engage in a fight, it actually results in them fighting less.
Right.
How does knowing how to execute a takedown result in a lower use of force? That doesn't make intuitive sense.
To understand the why behind the Marietta data, you have to look at the biology of panic, which the blog touches on.
Okay, the biology of panic. Let's hear it.
When a human being feels physically outmatched or out of control, the brain's amygdala basically hijacks the nervous system.
Fight or flight mode.
Exactly. The heart rate spikes to like 180 beats per minute, tunnel vision sets in, and fear just takes over completely.
Wow.
And fear is the primary driver of volatile, aggressive escalation. If an officer's only tools are a gun, a baton, and their own brute strength, any physical resistance is going to trigger that massive adrenaline dump.
So they panic.
Yeah. They will reach for a weapon to equalize the situation because they feel outmatched.
Because they feel like their life is instantly in danger if they lose their footing.
Precisely. But the blog details a profound psychological shift in the officers who learned jujitsu.
They felt different out there.
They reported feeling significantly more confident and composed in high-stress situations. When an officer knows through hundreds of hours of practice that they have the technical leverage to safely pin someone twice their size without throwing a single punch, their fear response just plummets.
That is fascinating.
Composure replaces panic. You do not need to strike out of fear when you know you can control the environment out of competence.
You don't strike out of fear if you can control out of competence. Man, that is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
It means de-escalation isn't just about using a calm tone of voice. It's an actual physical state of being.
Exactly. It starts in the body.
And the sources point out that the ripple effects of this physiological shift extend far beyond just the immediate altercation on the street. It fundamentally alters the economics of a city.
Oh, the hidden dividends are immense. The blog dives into how control without injury transforms municipal budgets.
Yeah, talk about the budget side.
Well, fewer physical injuries during confrontations directly translate to lower healthcare costs and medical bills for the municipalities.
Which saves taxpayer money.
Right. And it means fewer lost workdays for officers who would otherwise be, recovering from torn ligaments or broken hands.
And crucially, it leads to a massive reduction in lawsuits and legal settlements stemming from excessive force complaints.
That's a huge one.
If you go back to the sledgehammer analogy, when you use the sledgehammer, people get broken and the city pays millions in settlements. When you pick the lock using leverage, everyone walks away intact.
That's spot on. We also cannot overlook the mental health benefits outlined in the text. Law enforcement carries an immense chronic psychological toll.
Oh, definitely. The stress must be off the charts.
It is. The physical practice of jujitsu offers intense stress relief and better cardiovascular conditioning. The blog argues this directly mitigates officer burnout and reduces sick days.
Which are notoriously difficult and expensive issues for any department to manage. But, the section of the blog that really stopped me in my tracks was the proposal for community integration.
Wow, the mat time.
Yes, they advocate for regular shared mat time between the Colorado Springs police officers and local citizens. The idea is that on the training mat, everyone is completely equal.
The sociology of that proposal is just brilliant.
It's the ultimate equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
The blog suggests that you step onto the mat, you take off your street clothes, you take off your police uniform, your badge, your gun belt, whatever status symbols you carry in the outside world.
Right, you leave it all in the locker room.
Yeah. And you put on a gi. And for those listening who might not know, a gi is that heavy, woven cotton uniform traditionally worn in martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
When everyone is wearing a gi, sweating, and trying to figure out the physics of a joint lock, rank and title just vanish. You are just two human beings trying not to get tangled up.
Think about the psychological barrier that breaks down there.
It's got to be massive.
It is. When a local community member and an on-duty officer are practicing yielding and leverage together, learning from one another's mistakes, it forces mutual vulnerability.
Yeah, you have to be vulnerable to learn it.
And it builds a foundation of respect that a traditional town hall meeting simply cannot replicate.
A town hall meeting is just people yelling at microphones.
Exactly. The blog emphasizes that this shared mat time signals to the public that police are actively committed to protecting and serving rather than dominating or instilling fear.
Wow.
The training mat literally becomes a bridge between two groups that often view each other with a lot of suspicion.
The mat as a bridge. I love that. So we've mapped out how this control without injury philosophy scales up to military battalions in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen how it rewires the psychology and budgets of domestic police departments.
Right.
But here is where the sources get incredibly relatable for you, the listener.
Let's bring it home.
Exactly. How does a methodology designed for life or death combat scale down to an everyday civilian?
To answer that, we turn to the culture being cultivated at the Self-Defense Academy COS in Colorado Springs.
Yes. The head instructor there is Flip Aguilar.
Mm-hmm.
And our sources specifically note that he holds a Fighting Foundation certificate from the Valente brothers.
Which is key because that ties his curriculum directly back to the exact same methodology used by those soldiers down in Miami.
The exact same stuff. And we have access to 42 five-star reviews from everyday people taking his classes. Reading through them provides a really fascinating window into how these concepts translate to daily life.
The reviews paint a vivid picture of transformation that goes far, far beyond just physical fitness.
They really do.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a review from Hannah who talks about her 5-year-old and 7-year-old kids gaining not just coordination, but actual tangible character strength.
That's great for kids.
Yeah. And you have corporate teams coming in to use the academy for bonding events. And then, honestly, my absolute favorite detail in this entire stack of sources, the sushi and self-defense classes.
It feels like a total contradiction on the surface.
It's wonderfully quirky. We have reviews from students like Chloe and Angela who are just raving about this specific event.
What did Angela say specifically?
Well, Angela explicitly mentions she isn't a particularly athletic person, but she highly recommends this class, where you spend time learning leverage-based self-defense, and then, like, immediately after you learn how to make sushi rolls.
That is amazing.
I just marveled at the contrast. Think about the through line here. The exact same Valente brothers mechanics of leverage and physical composure that were used by U.S. troops to safely subdue insurgents in Baghdad
Right.
are being taught to a mom in Colorado Springs right before she learns to roll spicy tuna.
It is a striking juxtaposition. But, the reason it works in both of those environments is because the physiological response to stress is universal.
The biology is the same.
Exactly. The same neurological adrenaline dump, that cortisol spike you experience when a stranger approaches you aggressively in a parking lot,
Yeah.
that is the exact same chemical reaction you experience during a highly contentious meeting in a corporate boardroom.
Wow, really?
Yes. Your brain just registers a threat. It doesn't know the difference between a physical attack and a social one.
And the Academy provides a framework for managing that threat, which brings us to the underlying philosophy mentioned in the reviews. It's called the 753 Code.
Ah, yes, the 753 code.
Several students mention how this code literally changed their lives.
The 753 code is critical to understanding the source material. It proves this isn't just a collection of physical tricks or, chokeholds.
That's not just a gym.
Right. The blog unpacks the 753 code as the Academy's core behavioral framework. It translates the physical practice of yielding and leverage on the mat into a mental operating system for everyday life.
A mental operating system.
Yeah, it focuses on cultivating virtues like courage, humility, emotional regulation, and physical health.
So it's essentially taking the physical concept of composure under pressure and turning it into a daily habit.
Exactly.
As one reviewer, Christina, put it, incorporating this philosophy into her life improved her courage and confidence tenfold.
That's a huge endorsement.
And for you listening, this means you don't need to be preparing for a physical brawl to benefit from this training. When you deeply understand leverage and balance and you know how to protect your own boundaries, you no longer have to operate from a place of chronic anxiety.
Because you're prepared.
Right. You move through the world differently.
You carry that composure with you everywhere. You realize that you don't have to meet every aggressive force with equal or greater aggression.
You can just step aside.
You can yield, you can pivot, and you can let the opposing force unbalance itself.
So let's take a step back and look at the incredible journey these sources just took us on today.
It's been quite a ride.
We started in the high-stakes, life-or-death environment of military combat, looking at soldiers forced to learn leverage instead of relying on firearms so they could, win hearts and minds.
Mm-hmm.
And then we followed that logic to domestic police departments, discovering the paradox that teaching officers how to systematically control a physical altercation actually led to them fighting less.
Panicking less, too.
Yes, panicking less and saving their cities millions of dollars in the process. And finally, we brought it all the way home to community trust, character building for kids, and local sushi classes in Colorado.
The unifying thread through every single one of these scenarios is the conscious decision to prioritize leverage and control over strikes and aggression.
Which is so powerful.
It is the profound realization that neutralizing a threat does not require destroying the person in front of you.
And as we wrap up today's deep dive, I really want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
What's the thought?
Tucked all the way at the very bottom of the Self-Defense Academy blog post was this quiet, anonymous quote simply labeled, "Thought of the moment."
Oh, I saw that.
It reads, "There's risk in getting feedback, but only if you need to be right. If you're more interested in getting it right, then you'll regularly seek feedback as a forcing function to produce and transform your thinking."
It is such a profound statement on vulnerability, and it mirrors exactly what happens on the training mat. Well, when you are practicing jujitsu, you are constantly receiving immediate, undeniable physical feedback. You try to force a move using brute strength, it doesn't work, your balance is compromised, and you get put in a hold.
You get tapped out.
You have to physically tap out. You have to admit your approach was wrong in order to learn how to lockpick the joint correctly.
You have to submit to the feedback. And it made me think,
Yeah.
how does that physical vulnerability required to learn on the mat parallel our intellectual vulnerability in everyday life?
That's a great question.
Think about all the conflict we navigate daily. The tense arguments with our partners, the defensive posturing at work, the endless, exhausting, zero-sum debates online.
Oh, the online debates are the worst. We often treat those intellectual arguments like a physical brawl.
We really do.
You try to throw the knockout punch to win the debate and just humiliate the other side.
Exactly. What if we applied this idea of control without injury to our words and our thoughts?
That would change everything.
Next time you find yourself in a heated argument, online or in person, ask yourself, are you trying to throw a sledgehammer at this person's ego just to prove that you are right? Or are you looking for the intellectual leverage to actually resolve the conflict so you can get it right together?
It suggests that true strength, whether you are dealing with a physical threat or an ideological disagreement, isn't measured by how hard you can strike.
No, it's not.
It is measured by how well you can maintain your balance, absorb feedback, and guide the situation to a safe resolution.
So the next time you feel your heart rate spike and you feel that overwhelming urge to throw that metaphorical roundhouse kick in a conversation.
Just breathe.
Yeah. Remember the soldiers in Miami learning to put away their weapons. Remember the lockpicking. Sometimes the most powerful transformative move you can make is choosing not to strike at all.